Hello, I'm Hope Logan. I am an actor on Bold and the Beautiful, and many people really love both me and our Bold and the Beautiful drama. So I've come here to share updates about my beloved Bold and the Beautiful. Everyone, please subscribe and support me. If you do, I will keep coming every day with new updates for you. The storm brewing inside Forrester Creations was no longer just about business strategy, leadership titles, or corporate restructuring. Beneath the polished glamour of the fashion empire, emotions had begun to bleed into every boardroom decision, every tense conversation, and every silent stare exchanged across the office floor. At the center of the chaos stood Steffy Forrester Finnegan, determined, sharp, and increasingly unwilling to let anyone challenge the authority she had fought so hard to protect. The pressure surrounding the company had already been intense, but now the conflict was turning deeply personal, threatening to tear apart relationships that had survived years of betrayal, heartbreak, and rivalry. And as the dust began to settle from the latest corporate battle, one truth became painfully clear. Steffi was no longer interested in compromise. She wanted loyalty, control, and victory, and she was prepared to make ruthless decisions to secure all three. Behind the scenes, all eyes had turned toward Ridge Forrester, the man caught between loyalty to his daughter and the complicated history he shared with Brooke Logan Forrester. For a brief moment, it had seemed possible that Brooke's long-held dream might finally come true. Standing beside Ridge as co-CEO, reclaiming a position of power that symbolized not only professional success, but emotional validation as well. Brooke had envisioned a future where she and Ridge led the company together, united both personally and professionally, proving once again that their bond could survive anything. But those hopes now appeared to be slipping away with heartbreaking speed. Ridge, despite his feelings for Brooke, seemed ready to put Steffi first in the end, choosing stability within the company over Brooke's ambitions. The decision promised to leave Brooke devastated, forced to remain on the executive team while watching the co-CEO role stay permanently out of reach. And in the emotionally charged atmosphere of Forrester Creations, that disappointment would not stay contained for long. No one felt the sting of this setback more intensely than Hope Logan Spencer. Hope had already been carrying the growing frustration of uncertainty, watching her fashion line, Hope for the Future, remained trapped in limbo while Steffi continued delaying its relaunch. Every passing day felt like another reminder that her future at the company was hanging by a thread. Hope had thrown herself into supporting Brooke's rise to co-CEO because she believed it could finally shift the balance of power inside Forrester Creations. If Brooke secured that position, maybe Hope's line would receive the attention, resources, and respect it desperately needed. Maybe at last, Steffi would lose her ability to keep Hope constantly fighting for survival. But now, as Brooke's dream threatened to collapse, Hope could already sense the walls closing in around her again. The uncertainty, the humiliation, and the growing realization that Steffi still held the upper hand began settling over her like a dark cloud she could no longer escape. For Steffi, however, the entire situation felt like confirmation of everything she had feared. Deep down, she believed Hope had been maneuvering behind the scenes, using Brooke's push for the co-CEO position as a weapon against her. To Steffi, this was never just about business qualifications or company structure. It was personal. It was about power, loyalty, and years of unresolved resentment between two women who had spent much of their lives battling for control, respect, and emotional survival. And once Steffi convinced herself that Hope had tried to undermine her authority, a dangerous shift began taking place inside her. The restraint she had shown before started disappearing, replaced by a colder, more vengeful determination. If Hope wanted to play games, Steffi seemed ready to prove she could play even harder. Up until now, Steffi had carefully defended her decision to pause Hope for the future as a purely professional move. She insisted it was about numbers, performance, and what was best for the company's future. Publicly, she framed the delay as a strategic business decision, something necessary to protect the brand while couture took priority. But beneath that polished explanation, emotions had always been simmering dangerously close to the surface. And now, with the co-CEO battle intensifying the hostility between them, Steffi might finally stop pretending otherwise. The possibility loomed that she would no longer hide behind corporate reasoning and instead openly admit what had become painfully obvious: this was personal. If Steffi fully canceled Hope's line, it would not simply be a business restructuring, it would be retaliation, a direct and devastating message to Hope that challenging her authority came with consequences. What made the situation even more heartbreaking was the fact that doubts about Hope for the future had already existed long before this latest war erupted. Steffi had quietly questioned whether the line was worth the constant tension, endless drama, and emotional strain it brought into the company. The fashion house had become trapped in an exhausting cycle where every discussion about Hope's line seemed to ignite another family conflict. Arguments spilled out of boardrooms and into personal relationships, turning professional disagreements into deeply emotional battles that affected everyone connected to the Forrester and Logan families. And as profits declined, Steffi found herself asking an increasingly difficult question. Was Hope for the future truly contributing enough to justify all the chaos surrounding it? The numbers no longer carried the strength they once had, and that reality gave Steffi dangerous leverage. Because once declining profitability entered the conversation, revenge could suddenly be disguised as practicality. If Ridge ultimately locked Steffi's leadership position firmly into place, she might decide to use that victory to make the boldest statement possible. Shutting Hope for the future down entirely would send shockwaves through Forrester Creations and leave Hope emotionally shattered. Of course, such a major decision would likely require Ridge's approval, and that made the stakes even more painful. Ridge might not want to hurt Hope, but even he could find himself reluctantly agreeing that the line no longer justified the endless turmoil consuming the company. The reality was difficult to ignore. Hope for the future simply was not generating the level of success it once did. The brand that had once symbolized fresh energy and optimism now seemed to be fading into the background while couture dominated the spotlight. And if the line were truly thriving, it would already have a relaunch date instead of being continuously pushed aside and left waiting in uncertainty. As tensions escalated, the emotional divide between the Forresters and Logans threatened to become deeper than ever before. Hope's attempt to secure power through Brooke's co-CEO push could end up backfiring in spectacular fashion, triggering exactly the kind of retaliation she never expected. Instead of gaining protection, she might lose everything she has worked to build. Steffi, fueled by anger and convinced she had been betrayed, could justify the cancellation by arguing that Hope for the future no longer deserved the company's time, energy, or resources. But beneath those carefully crafted corporate explanations would lie something far more emotional and destructive: revenge disguised as leadership. And if Steffi truly crossed that line, the fallout would extend far beyond business. It would leave scars across friendships, family bonds, and relationships already hanging by fragile threads. Now, an uneasy silence hangs over the halls of Forrester Creations, the kind of silence that comes just before everything changes forever. Hope stands on the edge of devastating news that could completely redefine her future. Within the Logan family legacy and the company she once believed still had room for her dreams, Brooke faces the painful possibility that her ambitions and her relationship with Ridge may never align the way she imagined. Ridge himself remains trapped between love, loyalty, and responsibility, knowing that whichever side he chooses will inevitably hurt someone he cares about. And Steffi, standing firmly in her power, appears more prepared than ever to prove that she is the one truly in control. As emotions intensify and vengeance threatens to overtake reason, the future of Hope for the future, and perhaps the future of these fractured families themselves, now hangs by the thinnest possible thread. The atmosphere inside Forrester Creations continued to grow heavier with every passing hour, as though the building itself could feel the pressure mounting beneath its glamorous exterior. Employees whispered nervously through hallways lined with couture designs and flashing camera lights, sensing that another devastating confrontation was inevitable. The company had survived scandals, betrayals, love triangles, and power struggles before, but this conflict carried a different kind of emotional danger. This time, the battle was no longer hidden beneath polite corporate language or carefully managed public appearances. The wounds were personal now, raw, and impossible to disguise. And at the center of it all stood Hope Logan Spencer, watching the future she had fought so hard to protect begin slipping through her fingers, while the woman determined to destroy it tightened her grip on power. Hope could feel the shift happening around her long before anyone officially said the words aloud. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Executives avoided eye contact during meetings. Even the energy within the design office felt colder, quieter, as if people were already preparing themselves for the possibility that hope for the future was nearing its final days. The uncertainty was becoming unbearable. Every morning, she walked into Forrester Creations, carrying the weight of fear in her chest, wondering whether that day would finally bring the announcement that changed everything forever. And what made the situation even more painful was knowing that this was no longer just about business failure or disappointing sales projections. It had become a war fueled by pride, resentment, and years of unresolved hostility between two women who could never fully escape each other's shadows. Meanwhile, Steffy Forrester Finnegan appeared calmer than ever on the surface, but beneath that composed exterior, emotions were burning with dangerous intensity. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. Ridge's apparent support had strengthened her position, and for the first time in weeks, she no longer seemed interested in negotiating or softening her stance. To Steffy, Hope's support of Brooke's co-CEO ambitions felt like a direct betrayal, another calculated attempt to weaken her authority inside the family company. Years of rivalry suddenly came rushing back with renewed force. Every insult, every betrayal, every painful memory layered itself into the present moment until Steffy no longer saw Hope as merely a coworker or competitor. She saw her as a threat that needed to be removed completely. And once that mindset took hold, the possibility of mercy began disappearing rapidly. At the same time, Brooke Logan Forrester found herself struggling to hide her heartbreak as the reality of Ridge's decisions settled over her. She had believed, perhaps foolishly, that after everything they had survived together, Ridge would choose her vision for the company and their future. Becoming co-CEO beside him represented far more than a professional achievement. It symbolized trust, partnership, and the belief that she still mattered at the highest level of both his life and the family empire. But instead, Brooke was being forced to accept that Ridge's loyalty to Steffy remained stronger than her hopes. The disappointment cut deeply, leaving Brooke torn between anger and sorrow as she realized her dream was quietly slipping away. Yet even through her heartbreak, she could see the growing danger surrounding Hope, and that fear began consuming her more with every passing day. For Ridge Forrester, the situation had become emotionally exhausting. No matter which direction he turned, someone he loved was destined to suffer. Supporting Steffy meant protecting the stability of the company and reinforcing his daughter's authority, but it also meant devastating Brooke and potentially destroying Hope's future. Supporting Brooke, however, risked reopening old divisions inside the company and undermining Steffy at a time when she already felt under attack. Ridge understood the emotional history fueling this conflict better than anyone. He had spent years watching the tensions between the Forresters and Logans rise and explode in endless cycles, and now he feared the company itself might become collateral damage. But even with all his doubts, Ridge could not ignore the uncomfortable truth staring him in the face. Hope for the future was no longer the success story it once had been. The declining numbers gave Steffi an argument he could not easily dismiss, even if he questioned her motivations behind it. As the days passed, Steffi's frustration slowly transformed into something colder and more calculated. The idea of canceling hope for the future no longer felt like a distant possibility whispered behind closed doors. It was becoming a very real decision hanging over everyone involved. And the more she thought about it, the more Steffi convinced herself that eliminating the line would solve multiple problems at once. From a business standpoint, she could argue that the resources were better invested elsewhere, especially with couture demanding more focus and attention. But emotionally, the move offered something far more satisfying. It would remind Hope exactly who held the power inside Forrester Creations. It would send a clear message that attempts to challenge her leadership would not go unanswered. And perhaps most dangerously of all, Steffi no longer seemed conflicted about whether revenge was influencing her judgment. Hope, however, was not prepared to surrender quietly. Beneath her growing fear, anger was beginning to rise as well. She had spent years fighting to prove herself worthy inside a company where she constantly felt judged, dismissed, or treated like an outsider, despite everything she contributed. Hope for the future was more than just a fashion line to her. It was her identity, her passion, and proof that she belonged within the Forrester legacy. Losing it would feel like losing a part of herself. And as whispers of cancellation grew louder, Hope found herself wondering whether Steffi had ever truly intended to save the line at all. The delays, the uncertainty, the constant excuses about timing and strategy suddenly looked very different through the lens of revenge. What if Steffi had already decided its fate long ago? What if all of this had simply been a slow, painful path toward humiliating her completely? The emotional tension soon began spilling beyond office walls and into the fragile family relationships connected to the company. Every conversation became loaded with hidden meaning. Every family gathering carried the threat of another explosive confrontation. Brooke's anger toward Steffi deepened as she watched Hope suffer, while Ridge found himself increasingly trapped between the women demanding his loyalty. And through it all, Steffi remained unwavering, standing firmly behind her belief that protecting the company required difficult decisions, even if those decisions destroyed personal relationships in the process. The line between professional leadership and personal vengeance had become so blurred that almost no one could separate the two anymore. Now the countdown toward a life-changing decision appears closer than ever. Hope waits anxiously for news that could shatter her future at Forrester Creations forever, while Steffi prepares to exercise the full extent of her authority. Brooke fears that her failed co-CEO push may have unintentionally made everything worse, placing Hope directly in the path of Steffi's retaliation instead of protecting her from it. And Ridge, standing at the center of the storm, may soon be forced to approve a decision that permanently alters the balance of power inside both the company and the family itself. As emotions spiral toward another devastating collision, one question now hangs over everyone involved like an approaching thunderstorm. If hope for the future truly dies, will the relationships surrounding it survive the fallout at all? The tension inside Forrester Creations had reached the kind of unbearable level where even silence felt dangerous. Every hallway carried the weight of unfinished arguments, and every closed office door seemed to hide another conversation capable of changing lives forever. What once looked like a temporary corporate dispute had evolved into something far darker and more emotional, threatening to leave permanent damage behind no matter who emerged victorious. The glamour of the fashion world could no longer conceal the fractures spreading through the Forrester and Logan families. Beneath the polished presentations and elegant runway sketches, hearts were breaking, loyalties were shifting, and years of unresolved resentment were finally boiling over. And as the pressure continued building, everyone could sense that the next move would change everything. For Hope Logan Spencer, the waiting had become torture. Each passing moment without an official answer only deepened the fear growing inside her chest. She tried to stay composed, tried to convince herself there was still hope for the future, but the atmosphere around her made optimism nearly impossible. Even the employees who once rallied behind her vision now looked uncertain, hesitant to speak too confidently about a brand that seemed to be hanging by its final thread. Hope could feel her world shrinking around her. The fashion line she had poured her heart into represented years of sacrifice, determination, and belief in herself during moments when so many people doubted her. Losing it would not simply mean losing a business project. It would feel like losing the future she had spent years fighting to build. And perhaps most painful of all was the realization that someone might be taking it away, not because it failed completely, but because personal hatred had finally overtaken reason. Across the office, Steffy Forrester Finnegan remained resolute, carrying herself with the icy confidence of someone who believed she had every right to make whatever decision came next. The more opposition she sensed from Brooke and Hope, the more determined she became to stand her ground. To Steffy, this was no longer just about declining profits or corporate priorities. It was about defending her authority from people she believed had spent months trying to undermine her position from within. She convinced herself that every move Hope made, every conversation Brooke initiated, had been part of a larger effort to weaken her leadership. And once Steffi fully embraced that belief, compassion became increasingly difficult for her to access. In her mind, canceling hope for the future was starting to feel less like cruelty and more like a necessary statement, proof that she would not allow emotional manipulation or family politics to dictate the future of the company. Yet beneath Steffi's strength, there were flashes of deeper emotion she struggled to suppress. Somewhere underneath the anger and determination was exhaustion. Years of conflict with Hope had drained both women emotionally, trapping them inside a rivalry that seemed impossible to escape no matter how many times they tried to move forward. Every peace offering eventually collapsed. Every attempt at coexistence eventually turned into another painful war. And now, standing on the verge of making a decision that could permanently destroy Hope's place within the company, Steffi likely understood that there would be no coming back from this. If she pulled the trigger and ended the line completely, the divide between them could become irreversible. But perhaps that no longer frightened her the way it once did. Perhaps after years of battling for control, she had finally decided that coexistence itself was the illusion. Meanwhile, Brooke Logan Forrester could no longer hide the guilt beginning to consume her. What started as an effort to strengthen her position within the company and secure a better future for Hope now seemed to be spiraling into disaster. Brooke had truly believed that becoming co-CEO beside Ridge Forrester would create balance inside Forrester Creations. She imagined it would limit Steffi's control and finally provide Hope with the support and stability she desperately needed. Instead, the move may have provoked exactly the kind of retaliation Brooke feared most. Watching Hope face the possible destruction of her line because of a power struggle made Brooke's heartbreak even heavier. She could see the pain in her daughter's eyes, the fear hidden beneath Hope's attempts to stay strong, and it tore at her emotionally. Brooke knew Hope had already endured countless disappointments in both love and business over the years, and the thought of her losing this too felt unbearable. Ridge, caught in the middle of the emotional wreckage, seemed more conflicted than ever. He understood why Steffi believed she needed to protect her leadership, but he also recognized the devastating emotional consequences that would follow if hope for the future disappeared entirely. He knew Hope had worked hard to build the line and understood how much of herself she had invested in its success. But Ridge was also a businessman, and the declining performance of the brand made the situation difficult to defend indefinitely. The painful truth lingered over every discussion. If the line had truly been thriving, there would not even be a debate about its future. And that reality gave Steffi the leverage she needed. Ridge hated the emotional motivations driving the conflict, yet he could not completely dismiss the business arguments supporting her position. That contradiction left him trapped in a place of emotional paralysis, unable to fully support either side without betraying the other. As rumors spread that a final decision was approaching, anxiety began consuming everyone connected to the company. Employees whispered about restructuring, designers worried about layoffs, executives prepared themselves for the fallout of whatever announcement came next. The uncertainty cast a shadow over the entire fashion house, turning once exciting creative spaces into rooms filled with nervous anticipation. And at the center of the storm stood Hope, watching her future grow increasingly fragile while Steffi prepared to make the most powerful move of her career. Every delay now felt deliberate, every meeting felt loaded with hidden meaning. Hope could not shake the growing fear that the decision had already been made long ago, and that everyone else was simply waiting for the moment Steffi officially delivered the blow. Yet despite the fear surrounding her, Hope's pain slowly began transforming into determination. The possibility of losing everything awakened something fierce inside her, something that refused to quietly accept defeat. She knew Steffi wanted her cornered, powerless, and emotionally broken. But if Hope had learned anything through years of heartbreak and betrayal, it was how to survive when people underestimated her. Even as uncertainty threatened to crush her spirit, she started realizing that this battle might not end with the fate of a fashion line. It could become the beginning of something far larger, a turning point that reshaped her future completely. And if Steffi believed canceling Hope for the future would finally silence her, she might soon discover that destroying someone's dream can sometimes create an even more dangerous enemy.